So yeah, I think we'll get started now. Stu is going to take us through an acknowledgement and a beautiful clearing song, and then Alan's going to take us through a short guided meditation. So looking forward to it.
Nice, thanks, Charlotte. Warami Wanamabami, Giara Danai, Stuart. Ngubari Mari, Bayami Bamawanga, Ngubari Mari, Nura Nuraga, Nubari Mari, Bayami Bamawanga. Hello, my name's Stu. I would like to pay respects to our creator. In our language, we call him Bayami, to Bamawanga, to our Mother Earth, and also to any non-Indigenous brothers that are and sisters that are joining us here today as well. I'm just going to sing a bit of a clearing song as part of our connection today, and that's really just asking the creator or cosmic energy or whatever you believe in, if you believe in something like that, to keep you safe whilst you're on this country and to connect you in. And I just invite you just to find a nice space to center yourself and ground yourself so we can start this well-being yarn in a really good space. And then I'll hand over to my wonderful brother Al there to take us deeper into that space. This song is called Yenai. It's taught to me by one of our senior cultural men, Uncle Paul Gordon. Yenai, Yenai, Miami, Yenai, Yenai, Julungo, Yenai, Julungo, Yenai, Miami, Yenai, Miami, Yenai, Yenai, Miami, Yenai, Julungo, Yenai, Julungo, Yenai, Miami, Yenai, Miami, Yenai.
Wow, thank you, Stu. So just to help us connect a little bit deeper into ourselves, and as we do that, we're able to connect more with others. We're just going to do a very, very short guided meditation, just to help you move from perhaps the busyness of this morning and before and what's coming after this, and just come into this moment. So just get comfortable wherever you are. And then when you're ready, just close your eyes and bring your attention, your focus to the sound of my voice. And as you do, just begin to breathe naturally, not too deeply, not too shallow, just in and out of your nose. And now, slowly bring your attention from my voice to your breath, to wherever feels natural for you. It might be your lungs just slowly filling up and then emptying out. Or it might be the sensation of the air passing through your nose, coming in and going out. And if thoughts arise, which they will, don't judge yourself. Try not to push them away or hold on to them and make them bigger. Just recognize them and come back to the ever-present, grounded nature of your breath. The next time you hear my voice, I'll be bringing you back into this room, back into this event. You just settle into your breath for a moment. Now slowly bring your attention from your breath back to my voice. Just gently, slowly wiggle your toes or your fingers. And then when you're ready, just open your eyes and connect back in with this circle of friendly people. And as you do, just see if you can hold this state, those few drops of perhaps calm or peace that you felt. Just allow them to flow into these moments so you can really start to build the benefits of this practice as it flows into the rest of your life.
Thank you so much, Stuart and Alan, for that introduction. I think it's a really nice way to start off our talk today, and I'd love if we could now go in and hear from each of you a little bit about yourself, just to give everyone here today an understanding of your background and where you're coming from and your perspective today. So, Stuart, did you want to start?
Sorry, I was still coming back to this world. Can you say that again, Charlotte?
Just an introduction.
Okay, sweet. Sorry. Hello all, my name's Stu. I am a Darug and Gubbi man. So Darug is kind of Sydney area through to the foothills of the Blue Mountains down the Hawkesbury River. And Gubbi is in Gympie in Queensland. So that's my cultural heritage. I run a cultural consultancy and do lots of things around well-being, but to do with cultural practice and how cultural practice can bring us into a more better state of mind and a more holistic approach of well-being. In a professional capacity, I'm the senior manager of an organisation called Interrelate, and so we do anything to do with relationships, counselling, mediation, but you're really helping communities to and individuals and families to develop the best relationships that they can build within their personal and professional lives. So that's me in a nutshell, I think, now that I'm here and I'm present after that.
Thank you so much.
No worries.
You're next, Alan.
Hey everyone, my name's Alan, Alan Riva, and I spend most of my time, I have two parts. One of my life is just practicing what we're going to talk about today, just practicing being present, because I find that it gives me so much. I was so lucky early in my life to be lost on the Tibetan plateau at some point in time, and I got taken in by a monastery, and I saw a lot of my life and my world, and I learned a lot, and I've kept my mind and heart open to learning ever since. Includes our amazing First Nations culture, and Stu, who's a brother and a great friend. And all of this has taught me that by living present, we're able to bring all of ourselves, or the most of ourselves, to all the different streams of our lives. So for me, presence, when I'm present, I'm in my most potent state in work. I'm bringing all of me, my experience, my knowledge, my understanding, my empathy, into this moment, into this task to create a solution or into a conversation. And so I feel so blessed that my life and my work is really one and the same thing. And so in the work stream of life, I help people, leaders, teams, cultures to get more connected and grow through presence, and also then organizations to find and grow through purpose, so that they can also be a part of helping us as community, and also, as Stu mentioned earlier on, our beautiful planet, so that we can in some way help leave her in a better place for the beautiful people that will walk in our footsteps.
Thanks,
Hi,
Alan.
everyone. My name is Jay. I'm the founder of Uprise. My background is actually in psychology and clinical psychology. Part of my contribution to the panel, I suppose, is looking at what science says about well-being. And I'd worked in private practice and then started Uprise out of some PhD research that I'd done in online treatments. And yeah, I'm just really appreciating being here. It's so different to the panels that I'm normally on, and I can just feel such a different energy to this compared to the ways in which this is normally approached. So thanks to Stuart, to Alan for being here, and for Charlotte chairing.
Thank you. Thanks for introducing yourself. And yeah, I'm looking forward to this panel as well. My name's Charlotte. I work in the Uprise team. I also work with an Aboriginal organisation called Ganawira, and so this is a beautiful opportunity to be able to kind of connect all of these very interrelated industries, areas. So we want to start off and kind of talk a little bit about the lack of physical connection that we're all experiencing. It can feel like a huge barrier to connecting with people because it's something we just haven't really experienced before. I'd love to hear from each of you individually how it's impacted you. Do you want to start off, Jay?
Sure. I had a proper adult tantrum at the start of all of this. It was great. It was melodramatic. My wife would tell you it was entertaining on the level of our 3-year-old. After I kind of got that out of my system, I think I kind of had recognized it was probably mostly about not getting what I wanted in the same way that my 3-year-old doesn't get what he wants always. So he and I bonded a lot. Afterwards, I realized like he's probably going to get his own way by yelling and screaming, and that avenue was not open for me, unfortunately, despite what I wanted. And I think also I kind of, it was a good opportunity to do a bit of self-work and realize that the opportunity really was about learning to think a bit about what I was trying to do. And I think I was wanting things to go back to the way that they were, and was struggling to recognize that like there's a new level of complexity, and it's not really about trying to reverse the river in any way, just to kind of recognize whether the river's going in a new direction now. And I may as well just float with it. So now I'm doing a bit better. I'm sure there's a couple more tantrums left in me, but at least I'm enjoying the variety a bit more.
Stu, you want to go next?
Sure, why not? I think we've all had a couple of those tantrums here and there, mate. I love the the honesty in that, because I feel like everyone really dealt with the first lockdown kind of pretty well, and it was this second one that's come around and people are like, I just can't do this again, and I love the analogy of just going with the flow, and it's something that I learned through cultural practice, and it's probably only been the last kind of 10 years that it's really been in my life, is just stop fighting the river and just lay in it and let the rapids take you. And I think because of that, I've dealt with these lockdowns pretty well. I've just let them wash over me. But I hit a point, it was probably about 2 weeks ago, where I hit that complete tantrum mode. And more specifically, even then, last night I was walking my dog, and I was like, no, I've had enough. We're going home, because my dog she just did not want to play or behave last night. And I just went, no, I'm done. So I gave the dog to my wife, and I ran the rest of the way home while she walked. But I think the lack of connection is something that a lot of people are feeling, that I do feel really blessed that I have a national park that's right next to me, and I'm in the bush a fair amount. And when I'm in the bush, I'm always with my ancestors, and you know, I'm always surrounded by love. So I've tried to just deal with the lack of human connection with, you know, with connecting with country, and just putting my feet on the ground, and just trying to really ground myself as much as possible. And I'm glad the weather is starting to warm up a bit, because I've got the ocean that's on the other side of the national park, which is only a couple of minutes away. And just being connected to the ocean is really important as well. So I've tried to deal with the minimization of human contact, but up the dial when it comes to my connection to country and those other things, just to help me, you know, deal with the lack of balance that was being brought in.
Thanks, bro. There's really interesting points from both Jay and Stu that kind of made me reflect on, none of this is permanent. Like, every day is different. So some days you feel good, and some days you feel a bit wobblier. And that's all right. That's just part of life, you know? And for me, it's, I guess, one of the areas that I've sort of felt most recently is a lot of my family, as you can tell from my accent, I'm not originally from here. So I have family overseas. Thankfully, they've all been all right, even though some of the countries have been pretty hardly hit. But I'd love to be able to get back if something did happen. So that's kind of something that often pops up for me. But it's really interesting because, again, as Stu said, like, for him, culture, for me, practice, and Jay mentioned self-work. You know, this stuff, what it shows me is that it's like, that's okay. They're okay. Flights aren't open. Anything else is probably an unhealthy thought. It's just not helping me right now. So I find that this period, for me personally, it provides a lot of reflections and the opportunity just to see what are helpful thoughts, recognize them, thank them, and come back. And one of the ways I come back is very similar to Stu, and I know Jay as well, because we once upon a time used to bump into each other, but it's nature. It's so helpful to all of us, and I'm lucky enough to be close enough to, you know, the coast and beautiful rocks, and I go and sit on. So the impact is just, it flows like life, like the river that Jay mentioned as well. And I feel like when you're floating and you're flying, enjoy it, and when you're not, there is an opportunity for us all to see what we're magnifying in that, and then to come back into this moment.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. It's really comforting to hear that from all of you, because I think that's what we see, that everyone is having that similar experience. And I think it's really important, with today being Are You OK Day, it's a really big movement that brings the question and that bridge to people around us to show that we do really care, and we know that everyone's experiencing those similar things. But sometimes that question, are you okay, it depends on how your own headspace is, how the other person's headspace is. What are your experiences with asking the question, are you okay? Anyone is welcome to jump in.
I'm quite happy to jump in first. I think for me, when I ask the question, I ask it needing to be prepared for the answer, and you know, I'm lucky enough to have 5 wonderful children that have taught me that when you ask a question, often you get a really honest answer. So if you're going to ask a question, it's really, really important that you take the time and be prepared for the answer that's going to come, and come from a place of genuineness, you know, being genuine with, you know, are you okay? As opposed to, oh, how you going? Are you okay, mate? You know, like, and rather a brush off question, you know, it's, how are you? You know, where are you at, and how's things going? And, you know, I think Are You Okay is such a wonderful campaign for that. And it'd be nice if we can move that to a place where we genuinely ask, you know, often, you know, more often than just one day a week or one day a year. It's genuinely being prepared for the responses. And then I think if you're in a position to take that one step further, that if someone's not okay, how do we assist them in that space? And where do we offer guidance, and where do we offer just a space where we stop and listen? And then where we may need to do something more dramatic or drastic and make referrals or what have you, when someone is really not in a good space. So I think that question just becomes something that it's on an individual level, but then you also need to understand the ramifications of that question, and then what you may have to do when you come across something when someone isn't okay.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point on Are You OK Day, is that if you do have a conversation with somebody who's really struggling, and I think a really important statistic to think about at the moment is that from previous pandemic research about mental health impact, we're looking at probably about 1 in 3 people suffering from a diagnosable mental illness next year. And then you've got a whole band on top of that, which might not meet criteria for a mental illness, but you're still going through some pretty significant symptoms. Like, you're getting close to kind of half of us wandering around who are going to bump into a pretty rough time at some stage. And when you're looking at that level of statistic, it's also about recognizing that you don't need to be the counsellor or the therapist. It's just about trying to help them to get to the next place. So I think part of when we're asking, are you okay, or part of the reason why we don't want to go into that next level of connection, because we're worried about, like, what if someone's going to say, look, yeah, I've been depressed, or, I'm suffering from anxiety. What are you supposed to say? I don't think that you need to have the right response. I mentioned at the start that I used to work as a clinical psychologist, and even amongst peers of mine, after years and years and years of training, and sometimes, like, you can bumble through what to say in response to someone when they're saying that they're anxious. And often you find out in that experience of sitting with someone in a therapy room that you don't need to have this kind of perfect set of sentences that helps them to feel supported, loved, trusted, understood. It's more about that there's some consistency of showing up. I think sometimes it's less important about needing to kind of get the words right, and more important about, like, have you scheduled that next follow-up? Like, have you found a way to reconnect afterwards? Have you found a way to demonstrate that you're trustworthy and that you are willing to kind of support them beyond that initial conversation? Personally, I think that often is the foundation of trust and taking the next step for the individual, rather than needing to kind of, like, have something perfect to say in that awkward moment when someone's just disclosed about a mental health issue.
Yeah, it's such a good point. I think you guys have answered that pretty much fully. I'd add to what Jay was saying, that sometimes not even speaking is okay. Sometimes, like, because we get so hooked and we get worried, as Jay was saying, about having the right answer. And sometimes just being there is enough. Sometimes acknowledging that you don't have the answer, and it's just like, hey mate, I'm here. And you might sit at the other end of the phone. I did it the other day with someone, like 2 or 3 minutes of silence. And actually you said, wow, that's what I needed. And that can just be enough. And I think that comes down to, again, just coming back to being present, to listening deeply. Also, your intuition will tell you often, kind of guide you into, no, this, the path here is just to give them a hug, or social distance if they're in your bubble. Or just be there, just be there for them. And as Jay said, then check in again. And I think that, like, don't worry about having to have the answer, because we're not all trained. But we are all trained in being human beings. So just be in the moment with them. And maybe that is just enough. And then you can help them find the next step, or you can find someone to help them find the next step. The pressure's not on you. Just be there, I think, is really important.
I love that, Al, because, we have a thing, it's called ngawia in my language, or you might have heard of it as the Diri, which is deep listening. I'm sure Jay has a really beautiful, intelligent clinical name for it.
like that one.
But when we truly listen, when we're not listening to respond, we're just listening to sit and be with what's in front of us. And often we forget that, so often we move to fixing. We have to fix all the time. And, just stopping and just holding that space is a really powerful gift that we can give to people as well. And I love the balanced answers that have come out here, because I think we're covering all bases in how to deal with those things as well, which is really important.
Yeah, thank you. That was really beautiful to hear your perspectives on that one. And for me, it made me think a little bit more about the context and in what environment, it's changed a little bit now. I think a lot of us understand more about what to do when you're in person, but how can you translate these kinds of conversations where you're just sitting and listening in this more disconnected state that we're in?
Yeah, you're really, the context is really important. It's a very good point, Charlotte. And, let's just say pre-lockdown, or if you're not in lockdown right now, you might be sitting in a tent meeting with a bunch of people, and you might just recognize that one of your friends and colleagues is maybe feeling, doing it tough. And so the context there is it's quite hard to try and open up at that point, but what's important is to recognize that and then just bring your intention, maybe perhaps to just, when the meeting closes, just say, hey, I just noticed that, like, when that was said, you look like you're a little bit uncomfortable or something. I'm not, if you'd like to have a coffee, I'm here. And the context is important, because, we can't wrap our arms around everyone every time. Well, we try, but we can't always do it. So you're right, the context is really important. And that also then informs, also, if you're aware of context, informs language and how you approach something, because you might say something in a slightly different way to someone who you have, let's just say, a more professional relationship with someone that you love dearly and you've got a lot of history with. So, yeah, it's a great point, Charlotte.
Jay, I was wondering if you could talk to a little bit about the workplace context and how that might be a bit different too with friends and family.
Well, look, I've been really heartened by how much I've seen workplaces change, especially since everyone's moved on to Zoom, and you're suddenly in everyone's houses, and we've humanized things a lot just through that alone. I'm hopeful in a way that a lot of workplaces have shifted away from the standard interactions that we would have, and not being able to go too much beyond them into something which is a bit more intimate and close in some ways. I think there's still obviously the need to be respectful of some people's workplace boundaries, are that if you're under the pump and you're working ridiculous hours, sometimes people need to keep that front up, because you don't want to pull that front down until you've got the safe place to kind of go into. And hopefully, as Alan said, it's like if you're the person that's been there consistently to show up and say, hey, how are you? Maybe that person goes back to you at that stage and has a conversation. It just kind of triggers something for me as well, as we've been talking about that. I think there's part of this about the way that we invite people to talk to us if we want to be the listener, but it's also if we're the person that wants to disclose about if we're not having a good time. Part of that is a responsibility to let the person know what we need, and also to kind of explain that we might not need them to fix our situation, and that we're also okay in the pain that we're in. So I just had a really interesting interaction out on our lawn. Our neighbour walked across the street, and she said it was "Are you okay?" Day, which I loved, that she came all the way across the street just to check in and ask if we were okay. And she said, "Are you okay?" And my wife collapsed onto the ground and rolled around the grass and said she was not okay. She was having fun with it, but I think what I loved about her response was that she was saying, like, I'm totally fine. I just want to have a moment. It's just been, really tough lately, but I'm totally okay. And I'm quite happy on the ground, just melting and telling you about that experience. And that's it's a funny way to do it. But I think what she did was she's saying, I'm okay in my pain. Like, I'm happy to share it with you. I don't need you to fix it right now. And she's kind of conveying a lot of information that allows the other person to be okay to sit with them as well. And sometimes that's important, because otherwise people can get a bit freaked out about how to respond. If you just fell on the ground and didn't explain it, that would be different.
I think that moving away from having to solve the problem is a big part. It doesn't need to be that solution. It's just being open, like you guys have said. So.
And there's no absolutes to this either. So it's probably just worthwhile also saying, because we did talk a lot about when you're listening, and then as Jay was saying, actually when you're expressing, if you need help to ask for it, as well as saying, I'm okay with my pain, that's really, that's super helpful. But if sometimes we're just overwhelmed, it's like we almost haven't got words for where we're at. And if that's the case, don't, it's try not to bottle it up, try not to push it down. Just say, look, it's big. Yeah, I could do with some help. Can we just sit? Whatever, can you? I think it's, again, it's contextualized, isn't it? And it's important to reach out when we need to reach out to.
I'm actually just thinking, I think Jay left his wife there with the neighbour, and he's ran in here and gone, oh, you're right, you can sort that out. I really love the point you made there, though, Brother Jay, about responsibility and how we also need to own some of that ourselves. It's great that people are reaching out, but how important it is to talk about our responsibility. In cultural practice, we talk a lot about our obligation, and it's not so much about rights, it's about our obligation. And so when we're interacting or entering into a social contract, how much obligation do I own around my own stuff, and reaching out when I need to. And that's often a hard thing, because we're not always affirmed in our lives when we reach out, because some people don't know how to deal with it or what have you. But also when we reach out, also acknowledging at times that the people we're reaching out to may be in a similar situation and not dealing with things in the best way as well. So, but I love that you've named that responsibility, because I think it's so important that we do stop, have a look, and just do some body work or some things, and work out where we're at with stuff as well, and name that at times. Actually, my level to here, I'm probably not really good at this point in time, and I need to own a bit of that and see where we're at. I've been looking at the chat as well. We've got some really cool stuff coming through the chats, and I could see there was a lorry there, and I wonder if they're from Bunjalung country out there. But Michelle really named that the Dadiri was from Auntie Miriam Rose, and it was remiss of me not to mention Auntie Miriam. So thanks for writing that in the chat and letting people know where they can get that from. I know a few lorries, Mick Lorries, one of them. He's a good friend of mine. He's up there in Bunjalung country as well. Well, Gumbengi country, sorry, not Bunjalung.
Yeah, thank you. And I think you speak to a really great point, which is also about your own headspace and getting the practices or things that each of you may do. I know that there are so many of them, but to get yourself into the headspace that's ready to connect with others on that more meaningful level. I'd love to hear from each of you about that. Stuart, if you wanted to start.
Yeah. For me, presence is one thing, and Alan does presence a lot better than I do. He tends to be present completely in every conversation that he has, and he's definitely a great role model for me in that when I'm in that space. But for me, I use cultural context to kind of create that space or to connect with people. And so for me, it's through sharing story or song or dance, and just helping people maybe move through some of their stuff through their body if they need to, or explore where they're at through a wonderful cultural story, or a creation yarn that might just give them something that externalizes some of where they're at, so they can look at it without it necessarily taking over what's going on here as well. So for me, it's about that cultural context and how can I use the knowledge of my ancestors to be in this space with people. Like, you can't do that if you're not present, which was prominent when you asked me that first question today. I was still coming back. We actually joked about Alan nicking off, but it was me that disappeared.
And when you talk about body work, what do you mean?
Whoa. I'll talk to it from a cultural lens, but for me, so culturally, when things are going on with our body, we relate that to different parts of our relationship. So your shin is like your sister, so all different body parts will relate to a family member or something like that. Sometimes body work is around there's something going on for a family member or my connection to a family member. So that's one aspect of body work. The other aspect of body work is, for me, when I feel triggers happening, where are they coming from? Often for me it starts in my gut, and that's my first warning that something's coming up, and I need to kind of have a look at it and probably grab hold of it before it takes over my rational brain and my frontal lobe flips, and then I find myself on the ground rolling around saying I'm not okay. But with not jokingly, but for real, as we all do when that happens. For me, it's about, what is this? Where is this coming from? And how do I capture it and understand it? And sometimes I'll pull it out and have a look at it and go, oh, it's a bit yuck. I don't want to look at that at the moment, so I'll sit it over on the shelf. But other times I'll kind of really sit in it and allow that feeling to just be what it is, and kind of understand it a bit more, and understand that even if on a cognitive level I can't actually name it at the moment, my body's telling me something for a reason, and I need to just sit in that and allow that to be. And often when I talk about this with people, I just talk about some really easy steps it's about just stopping yourself, and you can say stop if you need to cognitively pull it to where you're at, and just what is that, and just take a deep breath, do a bit of breath work, which is really big in body work, and then think about how I can respond to it, rather than if it takes over, then I'm reacting and I may not be in a place that's going to be safe for me to react. So it's how can I go, oh, okay, I feel that, breathe through it, and then go, okay, I'm going to respond to you, or do what Alan does and sometimes go, I don't need to look at you at the moment, and I might do a bit of looking at you a bit later on. Does that explain a bit further where I went around?
No, that was great. Thank you.
So coming back to that question on our own headspace.
Yeah, your own headspace, the practices that kind of get you to that headspace where you are ready to connect, whether it's to yourself or to others as well.
There's so many, which is great. Like, well, firstly, I just want to say thank you to Stu, but also to acknowledge the truth that I'm not always present and that it's a journey. It's a place that I find deep joy, so I have it as a baseline, and I fall out of it more than I'm in it. But thank you, Stu, and my beautiful partner will tell you the truth. But what I love about, like, for me, if I talk about presence, as in coming into this moment, moving away from the storm that can gather in our mind and that can respond and react to external stimulus and situations that it then makes bigger and stuff. Because the degree to which, for me, certainly, I'm connected with myself enables me to be connected with others. What I love about it is it's a little bit like fitness. There's so many different ways of doing it. And of course, in the West, we have this thing where we like gravitate towards one thing. It's the big thing. It's going to solve everything. You know, it's like same with nutrition or anything else. And so we're all aware of meditation and probably aware of yoga as well. But a little bit like fitness. what's really important, I find, is that people find what works best for them. So some people like to run, some people like to walk, some people like to swim, some people like to cycle, and many other things. And it's the same thing with our own headspace, our own practice. If we find stuff that works with us in this life stage that we're in, and it changes as well, then it gives us the best chance for it to be sustainable, for it to really kind of help in our lives. And there's also this other magic formula that I found, especially working in workplaces, which is that it's simple to understand, it takes almost no time, and it has a positive impact. You get those three things together, and the beautiful thing about a lot of these practices is we can do that. And so one of the things I do every day, and I just call them micro moments of presence, and all they are 2 to 3 minute slots that I book into my calendar, so that I don't forget them. I get caught on Zoom and all of a sudden the day's gone. So 2 to 3 minutes, 6 times a day. I haven't met anyone from high performing CEOs to sports people to anyone who can argue with themselves, not me, with themselves, that they can't give themselves 18 minutes in the day to be in the most optimum state, as we talked about earlier, for their work, for their relationships, and for life. So I find that that's super important. And then what I fit into those 2 to 3 minutes, and I cheat sometimes and I elongate it, but into those 2 to 3 minutes is again around context. But one I find that's super helpful, and when we're in the work world, is just a couple of things. The first thing is you switch off. So you leave all your distractions to the side. Your phone, you've got a watch that beeps at you or whatever else it might be, just leave it there. And then get out into nature. And we might not all have access to beautiful bush or national park or ocean or something. You may have a garden, you may have a park nearby. I used to do this years ago when we used to travel, if you remember that. And I think I'd find myself in big cities where you look up and all you can, you kind of like, where is the nature? But nature's always around us. The sky is there, the wind is there. So switch off, get out into nature, and just start to feel her. And like I said, it might be the wind on your cheeks, it might be the rain if you're in England, it might be the sunshine, the warmth of the sunshine or something. And then just take 30 paces and just walk slower than you've ever walked before. Or at least as slow as you can before you think you're embarrassing yourselves to people around you. You just walk slowly. Feel the rhythm of your feet touching the ground. Turn around, same thing. Come back to your desk. Or come back to your family. Come back to your friends, whoever you live with, whatever you're doing. And these tiny little things that we build into our days, like they help in the moment, and then there's this accumulative effect that just grows and grows and grows over time. So I find that that's so simple for us, and we've all got that time. I also found that it can be really helpful for people, and I have the same, that if you've been on Zoom all day or something, and then you're like, I got to get to my emails or my blah, blah, blah. Before long, it can be 7 o'clock, it can be 8 o'clock. And then before long, that's not just one day, it's become a habit, because whatever we do forms a habit, positive or negative. So what I find is super helpful also is we're lucky right now because the sunsets are like 5:30. That's a good time to be finishing work. Now, it doesn't mean that if you've got a lot on, you're not going to come back to it. But 5:30, just create this thing like the Sunset Club. And all you do is you just make sure you're there every time. And so you just close down. Again, you walk out the door, you look out the window, whatever it needs to be. I haven't met anyone in life yet who doesn't enjoy a sunset, isn't blown away, haven't got a big smile on their face or feel more peaceful or whatever it is. And so these are the simple things that we can all do every day. And I think these are the things that make it really helpful for us. Of course, meditating can be super helpful too, so can yoga, and there's a bunch of other practices. There's hundreds across, Stu will tell you, across all cultures. But often making it simple, making it kind of almost take no time at all, and getting benefit of the three magical things that help keep it in our lives when we've got so much else going on.
I think Stu and Alan have answered that really well. I'm going to pick up on a question that came through that I also think is really important. So Alastair was saying, where's the best place to start if a family member is going through a tough time and they aren't willing to talk through their issues? I think that there's two things to bear in mind here. The first one is, when is this getting serious and you need to probably start to gear up to take that person to go and see a GP or get on the phone and call up the mental health hotline, or often cases when it's addictions, that person might need a bit of extra support to get into care. So just to be careful with that point around saying, like, sometimes you'll need to act to get someone to care. It's actually better to kind of really help them to get there rather than saying, I'm here and I'll listen and I'll wait. Because if someone's got depression, or if they're very anxious, let's say they're extremely socially anxious, you could be there for a really long time, or they might be suffering for years, when what might be needed is you got to pick up the phone together, book that first session with a psychologist, help them to get down and get on the Zoom calls and take that first step, and then do that transition over. So that's really crucial if you're dealing with somebody who might not want to talk. Sometimes you have to really push it a bit. I know that's a bit of an awkward thing to say, but that is important when it's serious. And how do you figure out if it's serious or not? Go onto the Beyond Blue website. There's lots of great resources there to figure out what's a serious mental health issue versus what's probably just transient stress. The second thing is, though, is if it's in that environment where maybe it's not, you can't take your colleague and drag them to a psychologist because it's just not really appropriate, or whatever the situation is. I think that I'll come back to your question, Alistair, because this is about a family member, wasn't it? So let's say you're trying to get somebody that you really care about to go and talk to someone because you can see that they're struggling, and maybe you've really done a push to try to help them to go and see someone and they're really not doing it. I think that the best thing that you can do in those situations is start to educate yourself about your own family system and family patterns and what you might be contributing to this. In case you haven't heard about it before, there's a whole kind of body of research and that's been set up around this that came out of the 12-step movement. And if you look on, I can't remember what the name of it, maybe someone can stick into the chat if you know about, I think it's kind of like called Codependence Anonymous. It hasn't got a great name, but those guys have got decades of research about how you deal with this exact situation to understand the family system so that you can figure out how to not play into the old patterns of, rescuer, victim, perpetrator, and all these other things, which I can't go into because it's too complicated to do right now. But if you want to really kind of take yourself out of that role of powerlessness of where you're sitting there and you're watching a family member go through a lot of pain, but you're not too sure what to do, there is a lot of literature out there about, especially in the addiction literature, about what you can do to understand I'm not saying you got a role, it's your fault, like your responsibility and how to get out of it.
I'm really glad you picked up on that. I was watching that question go by and I'm like, I think someone really needs to answer that, and you were the world best person to answer that, Jay. Someone has just put in the chat as well, codependence.
Thank you. That's the one I was trying to remember. Yeah.
That's great. Did either of you want to comment on that one at all, about the family member and kind of guiding family through tough times? Is there anything different or additional that you want to add?
I could add a cultural perspective. I think from a clinical perspective, Jay's really answered that like a psychologist can, which is really important to have someone of that expert knowledge here with us. For me, I think I know it's about the collective. How can we as a community be around that person and also support them in that journey? So if it is addiction based, or try not to place too much shame on it and destigmatize their journey a bit, and let them know that we may not be accepting of a behavior, but we still love that person, and that we as a community are here to assist that individual on the journey that they need to go on. And I've just found community has been a really, really important role for certain people I've worked with in the addiction space, or who are probably not in a good space. Because the first thing we do, right, is when we're in that space is we isolate from our community because we know we're not in a good space. So often people will either completely disappear, or you'll see them acting out. And so it's about the community going, okay, we're here for you. but also there's a difference for being here for someone and actually colluding or accepting the behaviour that's being displayed, and that it's not them as an individual, it's the behaviour. So I find for me that's always been really beneficial.
Yeah, thank you. Did you want to?
I don't think I need to. I think the guys have done an amazing job.
Yeah, they beautifully. We do have another question coming through, and also just letting anyone know, if you have questions, please send them through now, because we've got time to go through them. So we've got one about how to make up for a bad day. Sometimes meditating or positive does not help, and I spend weeks to come back to my normal self. So just some advice on alternative practices and maybe.
I can just jump in with just my own personal experience on this more recently. So just for some context, I've been fortunate enough that I haven't struggled with really serious mental health issues, but I definitely went through a period of burnout at the start of last year. So the Uprise is an employee assistance program, and we went from pre-lockdown and pandemic to suddenly everybody needs an EAP, and it went to really long working hours, and as a result of the long hours, I started to notice signs of burnout. Luckily, I'm a clinical psychologist, so I could see them early, but it's an eerie thing when I'm like, oh, there's a symptom, there's another symptom. Oh, now I'm up to 5. Now I'm up to 5 of 9. And I just kept ticking them off, and I was like, okay, I've got to do something. I'm on the way to depression if I don't kind of get on top of this quickly. Because depression can kind of get to any of us, no matter who you are, I think, if you get enough knocks. And what I think, apologies, I'm not going to be able to pronounce your name, kind of Priya, that it is about recognizing that sometimes the tools and the techniques that we've got are not going to be able to work straight out the gate. And my personal experience was I had to go out and have a look for a bunch of different tools. So I did go out into nature, but unfortunately it didn't help me. And then I did go back to meditating, and unfortunately it didn't help me. And I went through my whole toolkit before I kind of needed to take 2 days off entirely, even though it was really busy, reset from 48 hours of basically doing absolutely nothing, and then come back and kind of put together my own self-help plan. And it took a while. Like, I think it was weeks to really pull myself out of that. And that's not with kind of any of the biological, chemical stuff that can come with mental health issues, which I don't think was affecting me at the time, fortunately. And I think that the part of the piece that I have heard a lot from other mental health professionals and other panels that I've been on that people have resonated with was, as we've gone through this period, what part of what I've heard people finding very useful is to adjust expectations. And so an exercise that was just helpful for me was I sat down and I wrote down all the expectations that I was placing on myself around continuing to work at the same level as, you know, I was pre-pandemic, and then finding ways to kind of reset that back to what was realistic rather than what I was expecting of myself. But I think probably the key message to get across is, if that stat is right about, you know, 1 in 3 to 1 in 2 of us facing pretty serious mental health symptoms, part of the mental health package, if you are facing that stuff, is there's a biological and a chemical component. And when you're in that part of it, it takes a while to get out. And, you know, you might want to consider talking to someone, or you might want to consider going to talk to your GP about medication if that's the route that works for you. But it does take some time, and it's usually about having a good self-care plan, a good support network that you reach out to, and then professional help if you think it's indicated.
Yeah, that's such a great answer. And I'd just add one small thing. I mean, it's also going to be highly personalized as well. But one of the things that Jay touched on, I think, is super helpful, is prioritize yourself. Like Jay said, self-care plan starts with caring for yourself. You know, so often we argue for the stuff that's affecting us more than for our own well-being, and bring yourself into that equation. Hopefully it can be an and, not an either or. But in these periods, I always make sure and I've been through similar sort of circumstances that Jay has, from huge pressures from work and all these other things. And as you recognize it and you see yourself going up the numbers, as Jay said, if the earlier you can do this, the earlier you can go, okay, you prioritize myself. What can I not do in that world it's not going to cause that big a consequence? Because really, ultimately, your health and your happiness is the most important thing. So I just add that. I mean, Jay, they covered everything else off. But
yeah, they when you get on an airplane, not that any of us are going to do that anytime soon, but when you get that warning, not the warning, but the air hostess says, oh, if the oxygen mask drops down, it's really important that you put it on yourself before you put it on anyone else. And the reason they say that is because if I go to put it on my children first and I pass out, then my children pass out. So if I'm not putting that oxygen mask on my face first, I can't help anybody else. And it's so important that we do take that time to put that oxygen mask on. I have post-traumatic stress and from various things that happened in my past. And for me, when I fall in that hole, I know it's going to take me weeks to get out of it. And so the more that I can catch myself before I fall in that hole, count the things that need to be done, then I can actually get out of there very often, a lot quicker. It's funny, one of my cultural brothers, his totem is the donkey. Now, even you think a donkey, it wasn't an Australian animal. How can your totem be a donkey? But we've encompassed new things that have come to this country. And the reason is because a donkey will never fall in the same hole twice. If it steps in a hole, it remembers exactly where that hole is, and it will never fall in the same hole twice. And he at a young age was probably falling in the hole a lot. So the old men and women gave him that totem to remind him not to fall into that hole twice, and not to beat up on yourself, but try and remember what got you there in the first place, and then try not to fall in the same space again.
Nice. Hey, Charlotte, there's been a couple of the same question come up, which is probably a Jay thing about the steps, the signs.
Yeah, a couple about the signs of burnout. So that would be great if we could touch on that as the last question for today.
Yeah, I'll just touch on them quickly. So essentially, you're kind of looking out for difficulties concentrating, irritability, difficulties with planning, loss of interest or pleasure in things that you used to be least interested in, starting to cut yourself off from relationships and contacts. There's a list of them, probably rather than go through all of them. Honestly, Beyond Blue and the Black Dog Institute are probably your best places to go and get these types of things. They've got good checklists. It's worthwhile just kind of understanding early signs of burnout, early signs of depression, things like that. And if you are starting to check them off, that's when you start your self-care and slowing down.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed today, and I hope that everyone who joined gained something from hearing our amazing panelists. And thank you so much for sharing. It was great.